Video games. Hi, everyone. As per the introduction, my name is Chris Murphy. I'm from Epic Games. I'm a senior technical artist. I've been handling evangelism in this part of the world for a bit over 7 years for Epic now. So it's all good. It's all good. Just giving everyone a second to get comfy. So that's the cat test right there. Each of those things are. I've lost my train of thought totally. Where were we? Oh, yeah. So I've been with Epic for a bit over 7 years. My role has been helping predominantly Australia, New Zealand, and Southeast Asian developers. So if you've been at a games conference in this part of the world in the last 7 years, there's a chance you've had to deal with me at some point. A lot of familiar faces. Today we're going to be doing advanced world building. This is going to be a fun session. I'm going to try and cover a bunch of different topics that are... I have a certain level of kind of assumed knowledge at this point, just purely because it's called advanced world building. I'm kind of just generally hoping that people have a good idea of like how materials and things like that kind of work. So I can skip past that stuff and kind of get onto the good stuff. I'm going to tackle a few things. I'm going to tackle landscape setups, variation within them, good practices, landscape grass. I'm then going to eventually move on to doing procedural content generation, so PCG. Actually, while this is up, I might just flick over to a second project, just to give you an idea of what I'm yapping about. So at GDC this year, we demoed the Electric Dreams demo. The Electric Dreams demo was our kind of unveiling of a new system that we have within Unreal called PCG. And it's what we're using for, or what we're putting forward as a pretty big element for ongoing content development for folks. Now, it is in beta. 5.2 was the first version that ever had it. 5.3, which is the current version of Unreal, has had quite a few fixes and things like that going into it. But that's going to be a big chunk of what we cover today because it is, I think, will be in pretty much every shipping project once it is out of beta, personally. I think in the same way that we comfortably jump into materials and kind of add whatever we need to for those things, I think PCG is going to work its way into a whole lot of different systems for different kinds of games in different kinds of ways. And that's a big claim, I guess, but to give you the kind of idea of things it is, if I grab this object and move it around, this landscape kind of reworks itself accordingly. You can see this log here is finding the nearest place for it to kind of put itself down. The ground changes itself accordingly. If I was to grab any of these kind of areas and kind of pull them in, the trees and everything else is kind of adjusting. And it works. I think that looks pretty good for otherwise procedurally content generated stuff. Now, I want to stress because I want to stress this, that a lot of folks are obviously going to jump to the, hey, I'm going to talk to Chris about AI right after this session thing, and it's not that kind of approach. PCG is very graph-based. You kind of set up rule sets, and you give it ideas, like you tell it how these rules work with one another. In this situation with how this is built, it is very artist-driven, and the artist-driven side of this, the artists kind of break down areas they've done and flag things in a certain way that when it gets loaded into a graph, that graph can be like, hey, grab these elements and combine them together in these kind of rule sets. And like I said, I'm going to cover that in more detail as the session goes on. But I wanted to kind of give you an idea of some of the tools and the toys, I guess, that we're going to be messing with. Because I do think that this kind of system is going to find its way into every UE project in some capacity. There's going to be some time at some point that people are going to just be like, I can see little bits and pieces where this can sneak in well. So I'm going to nuke that and go back to open world WAGW, and let's go ahead and create something. Now, I'm going to create a project that is going to be, once again, as much as I love the open world setup, I'm going to kind of ignore the world partition setups for this session. World partition is really good, but it is made for like proper development for a larger world, and with a live audience in front of me, I think it's just one less thing for me to kind of have to manage. So I'm going to go standard empty level, and just as before, I'm going to fire up the environmental light mixer, and I'm just going to add all of the stuff that I need. If you're not used to that, the environmental light mixer just gives you your default lighting setups. I want to stress that it's not the light mixer, which is really awkwardly named. To be fair, the environment light mixer came first, and then someone else was like, I'm going to make a regular light mixer. It's like, damn. But I'm going to add that, and we're just going to kind of get the ball rolling. I'm going to begin by, I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what I'd like to create. I want to make a city park, and I want that city park to have pathways that are kind of going all around it that are driven by splines, so we can move the pathways. And wherever we move those pathways to, I would love for them to kind of paint dirt into them, if you know what I mean, and like kind of clear their way out. And I would love for like trees and bushes and stuff to make sure they stay out of the way. I think there's some other things that we should have time for, but we'll see how we go. I'd love to have so that when we put a lake in, for instance, that the lake grows some reeds around the edges and stuff like that, and adds little bits and pieces as we see fit. There's a lot we could be doing here. I'm sure that I'm going to get some people in the audience making requests. But yeah, so to begin with, I guess I need to start going ahead and getting a world together. By the way, the assets that I'm using today are from the City Park pack, which is a free asset pack in the permanently free collection of Unreal. It's nothing too fancy. I'm going to go and create a new material and call it m_simple landscape. By the time we're done, I guess it's going to be m_advanced landscape, but we'll see how we go. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go to my landscape mode, and I'm going to create a new landscape with m_simple landscape applied. Because I don't want to think about it, I'm going to just roll with default sizing. It's fine for what we're doing. By the way, if I use any hotkeys or shortcuts that you see throughout this, let me know. And like, if you're like, dude, what did you just do? I have a bad habit of doing that. So if you see something and you want to know, feel free to do a bit of a call out. Cool. So we've got this in play. The first thing that I'm going to want to do is I'm going to get simple landscape, and I want this to have some sort of ground texture. And we have a bunch of them in this project. Ground 2D is going to be our grass. And there was a ground, ground 02_n is going to be my normal map. In the same way that we did in the introductory session before, I'm going to bundle every landscape layer that I make into material attributes pins. And the reason for that is I just don't want to have like 100 different lerps, you know, one for every single channel that's going in. It's a nice way to handle this kind of thing. So what that means is that while all of these things are inputs, you can turn them into a single pin that has an input pin that is an entire material within it. In this case, I'm going to need the base color, I'm going to need the roughness and the normal. So I'll just feed them in. I think the alpha channel was either height or roughness. We're going to find out if it looks weird. And I'm just going to skip ahead as well, actually, because we know we're going to need grass, and I'm going to add dirt. So we could do it like this, where this is the grass layer. And we could do it with like another layer that was feeding in, and if there was another, pretend there was for a second there was another one here that was dirt that was kind of feeding in, right? And traditionally, that's how you would build materials. It makes a lot of sense. When you're building stuff that you're going to intend to have procedural elements involved in, I would recommend doing it a little bit differently. Because when you've got procedural elements, you've got far more of like a hierarchy where you're like, you probably want to have, thank you very much, you probably want to have like a base layer of dirt. Everything is dirt unless otherwise. And then after that dirt, you're going to want to bring in grass, and then you want to stack things on top of each other. When I'm personally working with procedural stuff, I find working with a stack a really good way to approach the problem. This node here is kind of built around the idea of every layer is unblending the other layers and blending in the new ones when they're going in together. But I personally find that it's a little bit easier for me to say, let's assume dirt by default. So I'm just going to quickly set up grounds. Which of these looks, let's go with ground 1. Cool. So that's going to be dirt. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to have a blend material node, which says, hey, you initially are dirt. And afterwards, I want you to be grass. Now, based on what is going to be a landscape sample that I'm going to call grass. So as grass comes in, it's going to blend from one thing to the other. I want to flag that what I'm starting to do here is going to start to get messy. Landscape materials are notorious for being the absolute messiest kinds of materials you can get. How do you fix this? Easiest way to fix that, honestly, is add a named reroute node. And I'm going to call this dirt layer. And now if I do that, anywhere else, I can call dirt layer. And it's the equivalent of having a reroute node that we can't see. So this kind of lets me kind of get that dirt layer and put it in a nice simple box that's still in the graph that I can see. But there's no functional difference between doing this and plugging it in directly. Do you know what I mean? And you can actually even right click on them and hit convert to reroute, and it will convert back to what it really is doing under the hood. But I do find this a nice way to kind of manage this. It's also not a bad idea to call this like dirt layer. And I can sync the colors up for this, which is a blue right now, and just set it there. Just for visibility's sake, honestly, these things can get out of hand, so it's not a bad idea to... comment, by the way, was if I hit C, it'll create a comment block. And I'll do the same thing here, right? Where just in case, that'll teach me. Named reroute, add new one, grass. Probably should have made it green because expectation, but whatever. All right, cool. So now I'm only really going to be dealing with this as my core concepts, because this lets me kind of just treat it as like the idea of grasses blending in. I don't have to care about lines being everywhere causing problems in my day. All right, so we've got that. All right, that's good. And if I was to plug this in and hit apply, actually I'm going to set this grass to have a preview value of like 0.25. First thing that we're going to see is, we can see that this dirt is coming in. And the grass has been added as a layer here. I'm actually going to add, I'm going to do this as a non-weight blended layer. Because I want each layer not unpainting the other ones, and I'm going to do this as rather explicit steps, I think setting this up to be a layer that is non-weight blended because of a hierarchy, I'm going to control that myself when we start to get some procedural tools in play. So I'm going to create a new object, and I'm just going to call this one grass layer. Cool. And if I was to ever, paint in grass, which we've got there, but if I was to paint out grass, we'll end up with dirt. Now, immediately I can see something that makes me cringe. Not talking about anyone in the audience, you're all safe. Like the one of you said thank you. And that's just the tiling that we see there. Like that's just some really gross tiling going on. Not a fan. So how do we fix that? Now there's a bunch of different ways that we could fix it. There's no necessarily right way, but I'll show you a couple ways that I think are really good. One that I think is pretty good as an approach is texture variation node. The texture variation node works by shifting the UVs. And because it works by shifting the UVs and then kind of dithering them, it's not too expensive with what we're doing. And on top of that, it gets a pretty good result pretty quick without tweaking. Now, how this works is if I was to click this, it's actually going to be a little bit broken initially. It actually requires these textures to no longer calculate their own DDX, DDY, their own mip-map derivatives. For anyone that's like, what did you just say? How it works is this. Every texture you've got has its big old high-res version, right? And then as you go further away, we get to from a 1024 to a 512 to a 260, 256, 128, 64, 32, 16, right? So like as we go away, we actually kind of like switch between them, and we switch between the right texture resolution for the version that you can see at whatever distance it is. But when you're kind of using the UVs in some sort of crazy way to blend between them and move them all around, we kind of mess with the default way to calculate which version of that, which bits of that texture we're really seeing right now. Anyway, that whole thing that I just said really just means you need to actually click derivative, which opens up a DDX and a DDY derivative, which says this is basically the size of the texture you are, and we allow the function to handle that. Functionally, that means that you literally just plug these nodes in. All right, so it is pretty, like it's not hard to set up. You just need to be aware of the fact that you're explicitly setting a MIP derivative, which is not apparent to anyone who's done a lot of just basic materials. I totally understand if you've never touched it. 99 out of 100 Unreal devs would not have touched it. But the results are pretty good. I'll do it to the grass really quick. Again, same thing where the MIP is going to be set to derivative. And I'm just going to go DDX, DDY, DDX, DDY, shifted UVs, shifted UVs. The variation scale is currently like a value that we can tinker with, but let's just see what it looks like initially. Cool, that holds up pretty well, I think. Like it is a larger tile because I should probably shrink it down, but even within the larger pattern, it's pretty hard to see explicit tiling that's going on there. Like this black dot is probably the best thing to track, and we can see that that dot is kind of appearing in a bunch of random spots rather than being all in a row. You know what I mean? So an imperfection in the texture is actually really good for me to track that the general setup is doing what it should. And like if I stare at the grass, this is what my life has come to. I'm having real trouble finding the exact points where it is doing its blends. If you do find those points and you're like, oh, actually, this could look better, a cool thing that you can do is you can actually read height map. There it is, a height map channel. Whoop, do you accept it's a texture object. You can read in a height map texture. And what that actually does is it takes the height of the grass blades, for instance, and only blends them in when one piece of grass is above the other one and things like that, which is a nice way of like kind of hiding those blends even more. So good approach. So yeah, texture variation node with DDX, DDY, I personally think is a pretty good way to handle a lot of these issues. But this is still not grass, right? Like that's still really, really ugly because I don't know, maybe I just used the Duke Nukem editor too much as a kid, but all I'm seeing there is just like flat surface. Like I want bumps and I want build. Sorry, build is the name of the Duke Nukem editor. Irrelevant. All right, so what we're going to be doing here is how do we get grass into our scene? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click and I'm going to go down to Foliage and we're going to create landscape grass. And I'm going to call this landscape grass underscore generic grass, I guess. And what landscape grass does is it allows your materials to control the painting of grass. Actually, I'm going to step back and show you the wrong way to do it. I could open the foliage mode and I could grab random grass from within this project. Let's grab you. And I could just, like with that selected, spray grass into the scene, right? But I don't want to micromanage every patch of grass in the game because that's historically considered a bad idea, right? Like if I paint dirt there, I obviously don't want grass there. We shouldn't do it. And not only that, the explicit exact spots of grass doesn't really matter that much. And it's also a thing that you need to care about on a per platform basis. You know what I mean? Like mobile devices, we probably don't want to show that grass, but we do want to show that grass on like medium to high-end systems. So what happens here is in the landscape, in LG_generic grass, I can actually create, I'm just going to turn off engine content. I can actually create that grass through the material. I always feel like I've seen Shrek too many times, anytime I'm browsing Foliage or anything like this, because like, you know that scene where donkeys like that is a nice boulder. Like looking for like some really good looking grass. Let's go with this one, see if it works well. So I've grabbed this one. It's currently got a default value of grass density of 400 or whatever. How this works is inside of my material, I can create a landscape grass output, and any pixel that plugs into here will now be that grass. Okay, so whenever it gets a white dot, there's a chance of grass. Whenever there's a black dot, there's no chance of grass. And whenever there's a gray dot, it's like maybe there's some grass. Who knows? Okay, so if I was to get that landscape grass sample, this will be a completely pure setup, right? Because it's just going to be like, hey, whenever there is grass there, paint it in. Give it just a sec to finish building. Oh, I missed a really important step. I got to click this and actually apply the grass. I swear I know how to do my job. All right, yeah, good. All right, great. So that's going to come straight out and actually just paint in the grass. Now, the advantage of this as a system is that when I go to get rid of the grass, it gets rid of the grass. Okay? And I know that sounds obvious, but it also means I can start doing some other stuff as well. Like a really cool effect you could do here is I could have the grass with a noise texture. Like if I was to apply, let me just grab a generic noise. Guess I'm turning engine content back on. Let's grab a generic noise that's like a really, all right, I'm going to grab this noise here. And if I wanted to, actually I'm just going to plug it in by itself so you can see it. When I plug in that noise texture, we should end up with grass. See that kind of weird pattern that we're getting there? It's because it's wherever the white areas are on this texture is going to be projecting that in there, right? But a cool part of that is I could use that noise texture. Actually, that looks surprisingly good for it being so sparse. But I could use that noise texture as a way of, yeah, I'll show you. Landscape coordinates. I wasn't going to do this, but I just started to say it. Now it feels like a good idea, so we're all on for the ride. Here we go. Woo! All right, apply. Rebuilding. All right, so that was a much larger, like I made the texture sample projection much bigger. And if I wanted to multiply that against itself, but smaller, maybe at 10, we're probably going to end up with very little grass kind of popping up here. Maybe too little grass. No, there we go. So the reason I've done that is this could now be what I'm using for other little tiny like flowers and things like that. But I could cluster them really easily this way, if you know what I mean? Like, because I can create patches of flowers, and then across those patches of flowers, especially if one of these is like if this is rounded, so that it's either a 1 or a 0, and we're not having any of the yeah, good. So that's now kind of creating little clusters of them together. See how they're like a little bit more uniform in what I've done? And that kind of lets me create heathering as well, right? Because I could have one regular type of grass, and then every now and then we get beautiful patches of like purple grass, and then it kind of goes back into green grass. I guess purple grass is just prettier in my mind, but sorry to grass shame. But But kind of like having that set up, in my opinion, is a really good approach to this, to like kind of create natural variation that as an artist you don't have to care about doing. You know what I mean? Like it's just going to kind of handle those things under the hood for you, and that's useful. Sorry, you had a question?
When you're in the material editor,
yeah.
I see you sort of have the text sample for the noises and has a thumbnail of that.
Yeah.
Is there a way to see the thumbnail on the multiply step so you sort of get?
Oh, to see what it looks like? Yeah, just...
Sorry to make you repeat that, but there's actually quite a few people online.
Yeah, that's good. I was just asking if there's a way to sort of preview the interim steps.
Yeah. So generally you would right-click and hit preview. Because the landscape is so big, I happen to have gotten a big black patch in this one spot because it's previewing 1 meter cube of it. But you could also plug this into the diffuse on the output or something like that if you really needed to. But yeah, I mean, I've kind of set this up as a really quick thing. I didn't actually want grass that looked like that. I just wanted to make sure you were aware of the system doing that. But now that I've actually gone that far, I am going to go set this up to have slightly patchier grass because I thought that looked pretty. Or did it? Was it pretty? I remember it being prettier a second ago when I showed it to you. Okay, cool. So we've got that in play. No, I'm going back to the gross amount of grass. Yay, all in. Okay, so we've got that in play. There's some things that are worth noting when you're setting this up. One is that you have this instance world offset disable distance. So Nanite in Unreal Engine handles polygons really well, just really, really well. But you've still got to handle the sheer number of verts that you're dealing with. So it's not a bad idea to add a certain distance. In this case, I'll say 5,000 units. What this will now do is this will turn off, so see the waving of the grass? But if I look at grass in the distance, you can see there's a point where all that grass stops waving. Now, I know I'm staring at this, and there's probably going to be some guy on the Steam forums complaining about this, but most of your players won't notice this when all of the rest of the chaos and stuff is kind of in there, right? So finding like a good value to potentially balance that on is a good way to keep it performant, because you are adding a lot here. And again, there's other ways you can manage this too. Like under grass density, if I hit plus, I can specifically set up, especially when I've set up more platforms, I could tell it explicitly, hey, look, my regular grass density is 200, but on PlayStation, I want it to be 300 because I know that system's always going to handle it and it's going to look good. However, on mobile, I can set my grass density to be like 5. You can just get a couple of blades and we'll deal with that. You know, so however you want to set this up is up to you, but like be aware there are per platform overrides for a lot of these things. And like honestly, even dropping it back like that, I think it's going to look pretty good. Oh, hang on, microphone. Caitlin. One sec. Oh, yeah, sorry. If you're looking to do the CSI zoom enhance situation, so when you're holding right click, W, A, S, and D move around the editor, Q and E move up and down. Z makes you feel like you're playing Team Fortress Classic again, and C does the opposite. So Z and C, while holding right click, change your FOV levels. I do it a lot when I'm fixating on something. Again, like even here, like those numbers that I put in were probably even then. We could have that grass all the way to a 10-meter distance. I think once there's bushes and trees and stuff like that in the midst of it, like the core stuff there is still moving to me. And that'll hold up pretty well, especially once we have some bit more occlusion going on. All right, I'm going to rename this map to demo map. And we're going to start doing some other stuff. Oh, I'm also going to set the random scale between 1 and 2, just so it gets a little bit patchier, because I want it to not feel like it's been mowed every day. Maybe 1.5. Yeah, good. And on that grass as well, if you really want it to be performant and you're having issues, grass shadows are a quick way to do it, but in my opinion, there's a pretty serious loss of quality there when I got rid of that. So it's up to you as to whether you are willing to sacrifice that. Cool. I think that's all pretty good. That's all sorted. Doesn't need to receive decals. Oh, and I'm going to set the distance as well. So start cull distance and end cull distance are pretty useful. because how this works is this is the distance with which it starts to get rid of the grass, and then the distance at which it totally gets rid of the grass. So I can actually tell it to have a really close distance where it has full grass, but honestly, it starts to get rid of it beyond that. Like I actually got a pretty good performance boost then by just setting that up, because now at the 10 meter mark, it's going to start to get rid of the grass, and between 10 meters and whatever that was, 200 meters or something, it's now going to lower that density to the point that, in theory, if I was to zoom in all the way out there, the grass density is a bit lower, but you're not really gonna spot it, right? And like, I don't know, it's still handling okay. Good. All right, so we've got that in play. Gonna hit save, and we're gonna move on. The next thing that I want to start doing is like, well, okay, so how do we handle this landscape and what I want to do to it? I want to have a big old lake in the middle, and ahead of time, I think, I turned on the water plugin. I think, yeah, I did. I'm a professional. And the water plugin is a great system within UE that is pretty well stress tested within Fortnite as well. And I've also turned on the Landmass system. So how the water plugin works is this. Let's say you wanted to have a lake in the middle of your map. You click add, you type in the word lake, and you drop a lake into your map. And then you give it a minute as it compiles shaders for the first time. I really wish I had the menu music from Unreal Tournament that I could play whenever everyone had to wait for something. And I've been wishing that for 7 years. And I've just never done it. I don't know why. Again, it's all spline driven. And we can see that that's kind of giving me a reasonable result. Cool thing is it actually handles the post-processing. Even our seagrass. And there's more than just lakes as well. So like if I did want something like this in the middle of the map, I actually think it's probably going to be a little big. Maybe it's fine. If we wanted other things here as well, we could. So if I wanted to have a ocean, I would drag in the ocean, in case no one saw that coming. Give it just a minute, I guess, and it'll handle itself. A cool part as well with the ocean aspect here, actually, that I really like is I'm not building anything now. Now the one I wanted was dun 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 dun. Did anyone else here play Unreal Tournament 99? No. All right, sorry. So one thing I want to point out is, as well as that, these systems connect. Now a lake can never run into the ocean in our setup because that's what we call more ocean. But if you, I'm sure there's someone out there that really cares about geography that's going to be deeply offended by my definition, but rivers can connect anything. So a cool part here is that if a river, there we go. If a river is connected to a lake, it actually does merge from one to the other, if you see that. So see, it's actually starting to, I gotta flatten that out a bit, but it will actually merge those materials together. And then when we go to the ocean at the end, we can get a pretty good result as well. Nothing that's worth noting on this front that's really useful, folks don't really know about, is I can right click and visualize depth. And then I'm able to be like, the river is this deep. Don't ask me where that water's coming from, because it's not exactly scientifically accurate. But I can also visualize river width. And on each of those points, like I could thin it out and have like a very shallow river, for instance. We would set that up as appropriate. Okay. And it's just building itself again. I flicked the thing off. Cool. So I just wanted to make sure like everyone had kind of seen that before. It's a great little system to have. It also has buoyancy built in. So if you add a buoyancy component to an actor, they will float, including velocity on the river. So if you drop a cube at the top of the river and it's got a buoyancy component on it, buoyancy component, or yeah, and then you set pontoons on the buoyancy component. So you can set like the floaty bits of the actor. And though they will then drift downstream, which I think is pretty cool. This was overkill for what I needed, so I'm going to get rid of the river and the ocean. Sorry, Earth. And we're going to roll with this. All right, you had a question?
Yeah. I was just wondering if the water system works with just straight up planes, or does it only work with landscapes?
You can drop it in there without it doing anything to a landscape, but you'll need to micromanage the shores of the water. And like that's, there's plenty of situations of that. Like even in Fortnite, you can see it in UEFN. If you ever launch that up, you'll see that like swimming pools and things like that are still using the standard water system as a way of kind of outlining it.
Yeah, cool.
Cool. So we've got that in, and that looks kind of cool. But what I'd like to do next is I'd like to start handling the edges of this. So I'm going to go back to sculpt mode, and I'm going to hit this button here that turns off visibility of a layer. So I'm going to turn off the water for the minute, just because I want to focus on what I think matters. And I'm going to go, and instead of using sculpt brush like we normally would, I'm going to go to blueprint brush. Now blueprint brush is very cool. How it works is you can add brushes that have been set up in Blueprint, as the name implies. In this case, there's a whole system there called Landmass, which is, well, I'll just show you. If I click Landmass brush and hit Control-click, it gave me a pyramid here, right? And that's not because it's the pyramid brush. Like I make jokes about the sheer number of situations we've catered for, but there is no auto generation of pyramids yet. UE6, here we come. I can grab this, and how it works is I Alt-drag, and I can kind of paint out the area that I want. And what that'll do is that will meet in the middle. So if I don't want it to work that way, which I definitely don't, I'm going to go down to here, and I'm going to cap the shape. And when the shape is capped, I'm kind of able to work it like it's a bit of a plateau system. Because this gives me, like, I can add now like a little bit of an area around the lake. So I'm going to have the lake there, but then like a general depression around the space that that we can work with. And I can start to either set the angles. So if I set that to 20, I set it to 2. I'm like, that wasn't very much. Yeah, so I can set that to like 5, 10, 20, and kind of get that. You could also do it as width-based. So I can tell it that the hill has a 4096 fall off, which is like a nice round number. So it's up to you how you want to handle that, but like setting that up and kind of working with it this way I think is pretty good. It's a quick way to get a nice-ish result, right? Because I can go to here and I can also do other things, such as I can go down here and I can hit displacement, and I could displace it by 500. And that will now run that displacement of just a noise to kind of bump it. Also, these can be duplicated. So if I Alt-drag, I can create another one of these. This has too many points for what I was about to do. So let's just like pull this in as a weird mountain shape. Sure. So we can get this, and I can kind of move that around as I see fit. And this one, I might want to lower it a little bit, and then Alt-drag. And again, one of the great features here is that this is still all on my layer over here. So if I have an art director who's like, Chris, I hate your mountains, I can be like, okay, and turn them off and revert to the other system that I had. Or I could put them on an entire other layer that is like here, that is something we can work with. But this is generally doing okay. This is fine. I just kind of wanted a general structure that looked acceptable, which is good. Cool. Great. The other thing that I'm going to do here that I think would be nice is we can use Landmass to paint as well. And I know that we've got this huge body of water that I have yet to hide sitting in the middle of the thing. I'll just hide you for the minute. But we can use Landmass to paint as well. So a cool part of that is if I wanted to, back in this brush mode, it might be a little bit tricky to see because of all of these extra secondary ones that I just added. Maybe it's fine. I can go here and I can actually go down to paint layers, and I can paint in, I can go to grass, And I can actually set the, I'll pull this across so you can see it, final opacity to -1. And what that's now going to do is that brush is now painting in anti-grass. Okay, so like I can set this up to be painting in there, but I can also do banded painting. So banded painting is now only painting where the spline is on that mask and not painting the filler area. Does that make sense? So instead of painting the inside of the spline, it's painting the rim of the spline that we can see there. What was that, sorry? Stroking. Yeah, it's a stroke, not a fill. Thank you. And and I can control this as much as I need to. So like I could get that and fill that out. And if I wanted to, I could have like it's being affected by a texture, so it's hard to see there. Oh, texture influence is pretty low. Let's really crank up that texture influence. And you can see here that see how that texture is being applied to it? That kind of adds a more natural feel to it. Is that standing out enough there? If I go like a really high tile amount, it's kind of like really noisy on the edges there. But if I go a really low tiling amount, it's just kind of like big bumps that are kind of generally pulling into those areas. And I can add multiple layers to it as well, right? So I could have grass, and I think I need more layers. Let's quickly just. All right, really cheeky thing that you can do that I like is if you get dirt, but you multiply the dirt by like 0.2 to be dark. Dark dirt with a low roughness is basically mud. So I'm going to just do that. And I'm going to call this I'm going to call this mud layer. Cool. Pretty confident that'll work. Going to grab you and I'm going to say, hey, mud is always going to paint over the top of everything else. So this is mud. By the way, do you see how much easier that is to like manage your landscape material when it is just kind of like the clean output nodes at the end? And this is going to be a new sample that we're going to create called mud. Yeah, good. Apply save. Great. And then back here in my landscape, I need to still add my mud layer. So non-weight blended. That's fine. And the result of that is I should now be able to go in here. Now, one thing that is useful is if I re-enable my water layer, what happened to my water? Yeah, but I hit Control H, so I should have unhidden it. Maybe when I nudge it. No. Whatever. All right, cool. So if I get this and click on the brush manager instead of the lake. Sorry, folks. I quit. I'm out. We're done. All right. If I get this, nothing stops me from kind of getting this river here that we've got and saying to it, lake that we've got, and actually doing the same thing here as well. So if I go to this and I go layer weight map settings, I can now add mud. It won't work immediately, actually. This is a thing that's worth noting, is it won't work immediately. The reason it won't work immediately is water by default doesn't paint unless you go to the landscape water brush manager and say, this does affect the weight map. At which point it's now painting in mud, except I made another mistake, which is my grass is controlled by just the grass node. So the final result is now grass minus mud. And that should now remove it. Good. So now whenever the shoreline kind of creeps in, we get that result there pretty well. Okay. And like again, like this wasn't a whole lot of work, and I can go back to the lake that we've got there, and I can control a bunch of the landmass settings that are there to make it a little bit nicer. Like this fall off is an angular fall off right now, but we could make that 20 as well, or something to, yeah, or we could go just really, what are you doing here? I actually think that on bodies of water, the width works a little bit better because I can say, hey, you're 2048, and edge offset. If you crank that up, so the edge offset is the edge from the rim. So 0 kind of comes all the way into it. Anyway, cool. So I'm going to bring that up to a place that feels kind of nice. I think that'll look okay when we're kind of done with it. The next thing that I want to do is I'd love to start getting some paths around the map. You know, like I'd love to get like lay down pathways that were going everywhere that we could see. There's a few ways that we could handle that. Landmass is probably the next easiest. So I'm going to create another overall layer, and I'm just going to call this like paths, just so that they're all in one place. And I could make this a custom landmass brush, which isn't a bad idea for you, because you can make your own preset settings on the landmass brushes that you're happy with and save that as a blueprint and then just drop that one in there if you wanted to. But if I drop this in, what are you doing to me? Ah, sorry folks. You've got to drop them in sculpt mode. All right, if I drop this one in, which is now at the top of the stack, so it has priority. All right, that's obviously not what we want our path to look like. But first off, I'm going to go back to my anti-grass situation. So paint in no grass. Next up, what I'm going to do is under shape, brush type is landmass outline, and I can actually set that to spline mesh. And that'll now project a spline mesh onto it. And if I cap it, the result of that is, sorry. My strong suggestion I have for UE, by the way, is I personally am always in favor of multiple monitors. But now I'm able to alt drag out a path and kind of set this up as I see fit. That is going to paint back in, and we can kind of set this up nicely. A cool thing of having this tied to splines instead of meshes is just like your iteration speed is just way higher. Because I can get this and be like, so the reason this is kind of extending all the way to the ends, notice that thing how like it's only when I get to a certain distance that it's appearing at the moment? That's just a little bit of a quirk in the landmass brush. The spline mesh has a length, and if you decrease that length, it'll now add more. Like it's only when at every 4,096 units it adds another one. But you know, we've kind of got that in there now, and I can, you know, we can tweak that as we need. And like this isn't just XY projection; it is also height based, right? So you know, it's much easier for me to kind of add nice park pathways that have like just a little bit of a twist to them and stuff. That we can set up as we need. But like it's much quicker to kind of get some like natural feeling environments going together, he says, while looking at the least natural part of it. Hopefully this is useful to folks. I know it's a bit of an odd topic. And yeah, we can control the fall off as well, finally. So if I go back to my, this is also only the first, like this is the version that's here. You can, because it's a blueprint, inherit from this yourself and kind of do whatever you need to. Angle, there we go. So if I set this to something gentler, we can have a much nicer pathway that is not as aggressively blending in, you know, like that feels reasonably nice. And I think once I kind of bring everything in, we can probably get into a pretty good spot. Paint layers, fall off width is 512 right now, so I could bring that in as necessary. I think that's probably good. So the next thing that I want to start going into is we can see advantages to like having this kind of environmental setup when we're working with things. But what I'd love to do next is start getting foliage and trees and such into the world. I keep looking at the wrong device to see what the time is, and then I forget what the time difference is between the one that is working, and then I just end up in a huff. All right, we are 1 hour into the session so far. Yes, so we have an hour and a half left. Cool. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to do is before I move into PCG, actually, I wouldn't mind showing you one thing that I do have a couple of magic numbers that I saved ahead of time beforehand. That's right, I rehearsed some things that one time. I thought I did. Well, all right. One thing on a flag is the material for the water system. I think it's a little bit of a drawback in the way that it has been set up by default, is that by default it looks very Fortnite-y. You know, like it looks very kind of like a stylized water. It's not what you would necessarily want in a city-looking park, especially with these waves going on. So how do we fix that, I guess, is the question. Good news is it's reasonably straightforward. If I click on the water body lake, every water body somewhere inside of it, waves, there it is. Wave source, wave asset. So by default, there is a lake wave asset. And this asset is in the engine content folder of Unreal. The problem with engine content is if we change it, it changes for all of them. Okay? Because if you change something in the engine folder, all projects reference that, and then they all get altered accordingly, right? So you've got to make sure you copy it out. For everyone that doesn't get that, I feel like we've seen enough multiverse movies that have been made in the last 10 years that everyone's on board with changing one thing and it gets reflected. So I'm going to grab this lake and I'm going to copy it to here. And this will now be I'm going to give it a name that's distinctly different, such as Calm Lake. And we're just going to open up the wave editor. This is a pretty useful little tool. It's an editor that no one knows exists because it's awfully specific. It's just a preview for waves. But we can drop down the number of waves. And you can drop down the amplitude of these waves. So if we wanted to have just like a really low amplitude and a max amplitude, we can get a pretty calm surface reasonably quick. And if I go apply this one, we've started to get some of that. So that feels a little bit more chill. I feel like I would take a paddle boat through this thing. What are those things called with the 3 wheels? Well, it's like a lake bike. Someone help me out here. Cool. Next thing is the material. So again, the default material that they're running on here doesn't suit every project, which is fair. So just don't be afraid to. I wouldn't duplicate this one, but actually no, it's an instance, so that's fine. So yeah, just make sure it is ending up in your own project before doing it. Otherwise, every lake will now look different. So I'm going to call this m_gross lake. I'm just going to make it like browner. No, this feels like a Vanuatu situation right now, and I'm making a city park. Cool, gross lake. Here we go. And if you want to mess with gross lake, get rid of calm leg. We can mess with gross leg accordingly. There's a lot of values here for like your distant normals and stuff to control like how big the ripples are and how small the ripples close to the ground are. There's also some other stuff here like caustics. So if you enable caustics on it, give it a second, it's recompiling. That'll now actually handle some caustic projections back onto the surface of the lake. But what I actually wanted was absorption. And absorption is just the quickest way for us to get something that is absorb you. This alpha is the gotcha because it is effectively a multiply of whatever numbers you do punch in. Cool. And like that's just a little bit grosser than what we had, but that's also, I think, all right, it's a bit too gross now, but whatever. You can fix that as necessary, right? Like, the instance info is pretty much immediately propagated. So if you're doing this, this is where a second screen really comes in handy for kind of balancing some of these, but I can kind of go to my absorption and now start trying to find the right spot to absorb just the right thing. Oh, you're not reacting live like you should. That's weird. Yep, you're only doing it afterwards. You know what? I kind of want to go gross brown. All right, I'm going to get stuck on this if I don't distract myself. So, a little bit grosser. All right, gross lake, here we go. Okay, so we've got that in. Started to feel like we've kind of got some assets that are kind of balanced out. I need more city park for my city park. Right now it's kind of like city grassland. So let's move through some procedural content here. I'm going to get rid of my landscape for the minute. All right. So a few different ways to handle this. I'm going to go right-click and go PCG and PCG graph. And I'm going to call this PCG underscore forest. Actually, we are at the 1 hour mark, and I did cheat you all out of a break last time. I felt bad about that because it's 2.5 hours of sitting. So what I might actually do is we might take our 15-minute break now before I kind of go into the PCG stuff. So we're going to have a 10-minute breather. Sorry, folks. I know I'm like, here's the good stuff. Coming up next on Dragon Ball Z. Yeah, I might actually take that 10-minute breather now, just because otherwise we're going to get on a roll and I'm not going to have a good convenient spot to stop it. So 10 minutes from now is 3:40. So yeah, we'll sit back down again at 3:40. Apologies to the live stream people who are chilling at home and don't need a break.
shooting my best shot. 'Cause I like it on top. Every day of the week, I like it on top. Walking down the street, I like it on top. It feels so good, I like it on top. I like it on, I like it on, I like it on top. Every day of the week, I like it on top. Walking down the street, I like it on. Walking down the street, yeah. I like it on, I like it on. my mind a lot. Don't need no time watch. I don't know how I got you in my pocket spot. Yeah, that's babe, miss you every day. You like my oxygen, make it seem like the barging done. Got my heart no barging in. From the to the floor to the couch. Might wake the neighbors up. Break you in, then break you out. In the end, we gon' make a child. Then we gon' hit the shower. Part 2, we don't need no pause. Miss me, we gon' get to you need a power spot.
Copy my steel. Face the fact that ain't no cap, I'm real. No cap, I'm real. Plastic bars from a copy my steel. Copy my steel. Face the fact that ain't no cap, I'm real. No cap, I'm real. Plastic bars from a copy my steel.
Got my heart no from the bed. Break you in, then yeah, that's every day.
Hello, attendees. Would you please take your seat again? We are about to start the second half of Session 2, Advanced World Building in Unreal.
Cool. I sure think so. Yeah, totally is. I know how to speak. I don't shut up. All right. Cool. Oh, thank you. All right. So I feel like we're getting somewhere. Generally, I think once we start to get like the rest of these pieces together and we start handling things, I think it'll start taking shape. There's a lot of stuff here that in hindsight I probably should have done that, like the paths, for instance, I went and had negative grass, but for something like those paths to really feel good, probably wouldn't be a bad idea to have, where are we, painting on the edges of the path. That way you kind of get that like track look, if you know what I mean, where, why am I not seeing paint layers? Sorry, you know when you look right at something and somehow just don't perceive it? There we go. So I might just quickly set that one up, do banded masks. So again, you can see that banding, when it's along the edges, starts to give us a little bit more of a track. I want to have much less of that. Actually, I might make it really visible initially, and then set the texture influence really high. And then the tiling. So again, if the tiling is high, it'll be consistent. If the tiling is low, you probably didn't see much of a difference there. Yeah. All right. Yeah, okay, cool. I just kind of wanted the edges of the paths to feel a little bit more of a muddy situation, but now I'm like falling between these values that would have felt good. It's a bit closer. Yeah, good. Okay, band thickness. Sorry, everybody, I'm now just getting way off base. All right, good. That looks way too much like a road. I was looking at it from a distance. Good from afar, but far from good. All right, here we go. Let's go here. Maybe that's acceptable? Whatever, I quit. I'm out. So I'll go home. Okay, so what I want to do next is PCG. I want to start looking at getting content that we can drop in and iterate on without just struggling to maintain it. And now I'm fully aware that what I'm about to show you is definitely going to be the Chris shows you the fundamentals of it, and then I'm going to go back to the Electric Dreams demo that we saw earlier, and I'll explain some of those concepts. I'm on level with you. Does anyone know that how to draw an owl meme? Yeah, if you don't, that's fine. You can look it up. It's going to be a little bit of that situation where I'm showing the fundamentals. We'll get like some nice trees and bushes and stuff like that going on. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a walkthrough on some of the graphs that are associated with here's what happened when a bunch of senior tech artists at Epic Games go wild with the system that I just showed you. You know what I mean? It's like here's the intro to materials class, and then you look at an advanced material, and you're like, oh no, I've gone cross-eyed. So hopefully I can kind of demystify them a bit, and that'll help folks out. But let's go ahead and get some PCG up and running. So before I made PCG_forest, it's just a simple graph. To create this, you need to make sure that the PCG plugin is enabled in your project. It is turned off. For anyone that's new to Unreal, because I know some folks stuck from the intro session, be aware that we have a lot of features built in that are turned off by default that are like, I'm a level with you. Some people get a little outraged when they find out that they're not there by default sometimes. They're like, what do you mean? I built this. And I'm like, sorry, should have turned it on. It is a good idea to kind of scroll through this just in terms of, if I click accessibility over here, there's text-to-speech and screen readers and stuff. Well, it wasn't that good, man. But as well as that, like Niagara sim caching, Niagara fluids, for instance, like there's fluid sims and stuff you can run, et cetera, et cetera. So just be aware there is a lot of these features that are off. And often they're off because they're beta or because they're only meant to be used in certain situations. But PCG is a beta feature, came in 5.2, so it's been kicking around since March. Now I dragged that volume into the world and we didn't see anything. And the reason we didn't is I need to open the graph. Now, PCG is definitely one of those I wish I had two monitors while demoing this features that we've got. But that's okay. I'll do my best to explain how this works. So over here we have input and output. Output only matters because PCG graphs can be stuck inside of PCG graphs. Let's look at the input. If I was to get this, okay, if I was to get this and I was to say, hey, when you begin, I want you to sample the surface. Okay. What does that do? Well, up top, I'm going to click Debug Object and select the one that's in the world. And then back in the world, we're not going to see anything yet. But if I look at this and hit D, D is for debug, we still don't see anything. That was strange. Sorry, folks. But we should have seen something. Well, let's all go home. Surface sample, seed. Should be getting something out of you, but we're not. Should be getting something out of you, but we're not. Sorry, folks. It's awkward because that is the most straightforward. Yeah, gotcha. Sorry about that, folks. All right, so what that was is I was awkwardly sampling the input rather than sampling the landscape that we were a part of. In my defense, it's like 6 o'clock in my head, and I've checked out for the day. All right, so how this works is this. D is debug. When it's off, we don't see it. When it's on, we do see it. And every node, when it's created, gets given a density level. So this is all of the points that will be arbitrarily tested as, hey, this could be something for whatever it is that I'm about to build. And like if I wanted to, we can get these points and we can say to them, hey, I want to start just running some operations on you. For instance, I could transform those points. If I transform the points, let's say I want to randomize the scale between 1 and 2, you can now see that we have a whole lot of those points kind of shuffled around. Some are small, some are bigger. I can do other things as well, like I can get this transform points and I could randomly rotate them between 0 and 360. And now you can see they're all going to be kind of giving me something. I can go back to the sample as well and I can say, well, how many points per square meter do we want? Well, I want fewer than that. So let's try 0.01. And maybe that's actually a good starting point for our trees, right? And if I was to grab this, I can actually run this into a static mesh spawner. And I can tell it that I want anything that runs into these points, I can say, hey, I want to spawn a mesh. If I remember right, we have a bunch of really nice Umar trees. Back to the Shrek donkey situation. That is a nice boulder. You good? 7 looked good. 8 seems good. At which point, all of those are now going to be there. Now, that's not ideal for a few reasons. But you can see that just even getting those 2 trees and starting to kind of randomly shuffle them around isn't the worst result. I mean, it's the worst result for anyone that's trying to use the path. But like, everyone else. And if we were to get this, well, let's start looking at other things we could do. I can filter at any point, right? So I can grab information as it kind of comes in, and I can change accordingly. So if I wanted to, so before using D to preview these things, I'm just going to disconnect that for a second. Before using D to preview these things, the other one that's really useful here is A, which is attributes. So attributes will actually show me all of the values of everything that is on that point. Does anyone notice any particularly strange values here that you may not have expected to be a value? It might be a little hard to see from there. Does anyone notice any values that kind of stand out as a little bit strange? The last two. It automatically grabs the landscape layer weights of everything beneath it. You see that? The advantage of that is if we know how much mud is there, we're actually able to kind of like filter that as appropriate. And I could work with that as I wanted to as well. Like I could multiply the density, which is the black to white value that we can see right now, against the amount of grass there. And then I could say, hey, if there's no grass, that way we have less chance of there being stuff in those edges. So I can kind of grab some of those attributes, and if I ran like a multiply, for instance, and I said, hey, I want to multiply density against grass, and output that back to density. If I hit D on that, notice that all of the pieces here that were on dirt are now black. Do you see that? And all of the parts that are on grass are still basically where they were. In theory, if something was kind of half grass, it would lower the chance of there being something in those spots. But in doing that, I'm now able to run a density filter, for instance, where I say, hey, I only really want anything that is U to U. And that'll kind of clip them out from there. So when we kind of clip them out from there and then I connect this back in, we've started to fix all of our pathways. And if I was to go look over here, all right, so we still have issues. It's fine. But there's some other ways to do that. So while I could look at that and subtract mud as a really obvious solution to that, what I might do is just show you another way to solve the same problem, just so you can get it kind of a bit of an idea of another approach that you may need to take given certain situations. So once autosave is complete. All right, so we have those static meshes, right? But here's a fun one. We have a spline sampler. And a spline sampler, as the name implies, samples a spline. And it needs a spline to sample. Now, a cool thing that we can do is you can call getSplineData. Now, getSplineData by default looks at itself and uses that information, okay? But I can actually query every actor in the world, and I can look for every actor with a certain tag on it. So if you, in the actor, have literally just flagged remove PCG, it will look for every actor in the world with a tag that says remove PCG. Or maybe you want to have a tag in your project that is called no trees. And anytime you've got a spline that's outlined, as long as that actor says no trees, every PCG system that's been set up correctly will now recognize that no trees. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So in this case, I'm going to go something a bit simpler, and I'm going to go by class. And I'm literally just going to look for every single lake. A useful thing here is there's a select multiple checkbox. So by default, it's going to look for one lake and then after that, it's just going to peace out. It's done. But if select multiple is checked, it will, it will grab all of them. So I'll hit this on this. I might disconnect these trees for just a second. Now, still isn't quite working, and that's my own fault right now. See this box that's over here that was the PCG volume? Notice that when that volume is over the top of the spline, we can see it doing something. And that's just because by default, you should probably size your PCG volume up to be the size of whatever it's doing stuff on. But if you click unbounded, that will then is no longer shackled by the volume sizes. But you can now see there's kind of growing those points over there. These are actually all long points by default. It's grabbing the average segment. It's grabbing a segment length and just kind of stretching them along it. But I can do find all things on the spline, or I can do on the interior. If I do on the interior, might be a little hard to see, but see how there's that like white thing that's just like that's just because it's purely filled it with interior sample spacing of every 1 meter is a cube. So it's just filled our spline with cubes. Okay. Now the cool part is like I can get this and I can project them onto the landscape, for instance. And if I go back here and I actually hit the debug key, you can now see that those are being projected back onto the landscape. You get me? And again, like with those being projected onto the landscape, I can start to do other things as well. So I could run a difference node, for instance. A difference node gets 2 things and allows me to Boolean them. By the way, pro tip, if you plug something into here, by default, it grabs everything plugged into it. In Blueprint, when you plug something else in, it's like, all right, I'll swap my input over for that other thing. Same with the material editor. But in PCG, pressing that button grabs everything that's coming into it. Because quite often you're actually like, hey, give me all of the points from here, all of the points from here, and all of the points from here. So it kind of makes sense from a workflow perspective, but you've just got to get used to that being a thing. Anyway, if I get this as the source, this as the differences, and this as the removal, I'm then going to run a binary function on it. What that should do is the distance function, sorry, the difference function, this one here, will go through and remove all of the dots that overlap. So anytime there's overlap between these points and these points, it will remove them. Okay? And again, you've got over here, you can see mode, set to inferred, diff metadata, and you can choose how you want it to handle these things. But this is kind of a good way of kind of elegantly handling that. So we could have done the same thing before by generating spline points along the road, for instance. And we could still do that, right? Like we could still, before where we got rid of all of those points that had, we clipped from the filter, we could do the opposite, and we could spawn stuff just on the road so that we have like random decals that look like road tracks, or we could start having things by the side of the road. We randomly offset them left and right and try and place objects like debris along the side of the road, signposts, lanterns. I don't know what kind of stuff we may be after. But I did want to kind of step through that. Because like, see, that's like I've been explaining to you what I'm doing as we've been working, and we're still getting a reasonably good result pretty quickly with like everything kind of stacking on top, right? Even my ugly lake is looking more appealing than I thought it would, so that's good. And like we can go back and do other things as well. Like I can get this same body of lake that we had before and run a spline sampler on it. And on the spline, but this time instead of subdivision, I could do distance and make it a distance of every 100 units is good. Let's have a quick look at that. Oops. Remember that whole thing I told you about unbounded? Here we go. You can now see that it's actually just creating a point rim around the edges. So with like that in mind, I could then do other stuff too, right? Like I could do, by the way, I'm just kind of riffing on this right now, so if there's stuff you want to see, let me know. But I could do another surface sampler that is for reeds, because that sounded like a good idea before. And I could do this surface sampler as, let's have a quick look at what that looks like. I really should just make the thing the correct size, but whatever. Cool. So these could all be reeds if we wanted them to be, right? So I could actually get the distance between these points and these points. And the distance here, I could save to set density. There we go. So check this. So by getting the distance between them, every point that I had created before is now looking to see how close it is to the nearest point in the other set of data. And by getting all of the points within the other set of data, that tells me how close these trees are to the water line, right? So if I wanted to, in this case, I've gotten the distance between them. 10 meters is probably huge, so maybe I'll do 500. Which gets me this kind of spacing here, which is pretty good. What I might do is, after we get that distance and we can see that that's pretty good, I probably want to do a remap where the 0 to 1 range is actually the flip. So instead of it being 0 to 1, I want to go 1 to 0. Because what that does is that now says only these middle bits are going to be the ones that we care about. Does that make sense? And once I've got them in, I can run that filter again. And we can filter by actual attributes. The density ones are all kind of built in, so they're pretty convenient to just use, to be honest. And then I'll transform all those points. And like really what we're getting pretty quickly, see now I've just got this nice rim here where I'm like, all right, cool, so that's good. Let's go between 0, 360. Let's randomize the scale between 0.5 and 1.5. And now we're going to get all of these bits, right? And with those in play, let's spawn different static meshes. I mentioned there's reeds before, and now I really want to do it. So there are some reeds in here. Those look kind of reedy. All right, terrible. You're not reedy enough. Or I could just crank up the number of them. Maybe even you, grass 14. I think that'll work when I have too much of it. So let's get you. And let's drop the size of you as extents. Good. Cool. Get rid of the cube. So now as you approach the waterline, you're going to start to get these little grasses kind of starting to grow around the edges there. I actually think it'd be better as well if these were, you can kind of move them inside of the sample. I can't remember how to do it. But we could shift them slightly in if we chose to. I can't remember what the thing is. But like, again, like that adds really quickly just a lot of character. You know what I mean? Like as we approach the waterline, see how we just start to get that nice feeling, good vibes. And that's kind of one of the big aspects here. Yeah. Oh, hang on. Wait. Kaylin. I'll keep talking while waiting. But like one of the big aspects here that I really want to stress is that this is also super reactive, because if I liked this and then I was like, actually my lake needs to be here, it's gonna make all of the trees now push out to that location. You see what I mean? Like, and if I pull it back again, it's going to recalculate all of my trees and all of my everything else. And I did this in a very ugly, quick way as well. Like, there was no reason that when I did this distance value before, I did it as a very explicit 5 meter kind of binding. But I could, if I wanted to, grab 10 meters, but then apply like a noise distribution to it so that we end up with like patches of reeds that thin out and then get like fatter again. You know what I mean? Like, and that even pushing that out to 10 meters means that we start to get these reeds kind of poking out of the waterline and stuff as well. Actually, that looks really good. I should have just kept my original number. But it adds a lot of character really quickly. And yeah, that's why I kind of wanted to touch on that a little bit there. Yeah, you had a question?
Can you interact with materials with that data too? So like how you had the like white, black, square sample.
Oh, here we are. Start again.
Can you interact with materials with that sampled data? So like how you had the gradient from the water going out like white to black, can you have it like the roughness so they look wetter?
Oh yeah.
As they get away?
So if you wanted to do something like that, I'd push it off to a runtime virtual texture, and the RVT would then pass its data back to those things. But you can actually feed data in as well. You can feed data into them as well. I can't recall how to do it. I think it's, okay, here it is, yeah. So when you get the static mesh spawner, there's the instance data packet type. And I think you can feed custom variables in there if you create a custom class that is like, here's the type of info I need to pass through to this thing, and then the HISM passes it through. I think you need to pass it through as primitive data, but you can pass certain levels of information. But for certain other things, you probably want to access an RVT. Yeah. No stress. Cool. Yeah, so like I wanted to kind of like start stepping through this because there's a few things that I want to really make a point of. And the first is that I'm part of the problem here. Just definitely part of the problem. And that is this. Most people that saw PCG when we showed it off were, I had quite a lot of people hit me up and be like, so that's Epic Games' new forest generation tool. And it checks out. You know, we made a forest. You know, and it looks good. And then when I demoed it, I was like, hey kids, here's a forest. And I did the same thing. But if you think about all of the secondary stuff that you can do with PCG, because I've added it as a volume here. And generally when you add it as a volume, it acts upon everything within the volume, if that makes sense. Unless you go through and check unbounded on everything. But you can also add it as a component. So any actor in the world can have a PCG component that knows to like spawn points across its surface or to spawn points beneath it, okay? So if you think about a log static mesh, being able to just be like, hey, why don't you grow some mushrooms if those mushrooms are able to be grown on you, randomly scattered, batched between all of them. If you think about every parked car randomly being like, maybe I'm gonna add little bits of oil that have dropped beneath random cars throughout the world. Or maybe every single tree that you place into the world runs a PCG script that actually just drops branches on the ground beneath them and spreads leaves and puts down emitters as appropriate for the kind of trees that are there. So the thing that I'm trying to get at here is like, the reason that I think PCG is very likely to end up in a whole lot of projects is there's the doing the art part, and then there is the secondary layer, just adding that finer detail that is honestly usually just the busy work, right? You know, it's the painting in all of this manual stuff. It's like if you have roads, you go through and you do it, and you have a good artist who's laid out these roads, and the scene looks kind of good. And then you have a great artist who's gone through and manually placed all the little bits of grass that are growing out of the pavement here and there, and like, you know what I mean? Like that work is frustrating when a person comes up to you and says, hey, actually, we need to move the road. And then you think about all of your manually placed grass in the road, and you're like, okay, it's going to take a month. You know, like, so being able to have like systems that you can set up and build and automate that handle a lot of the secondary details is really interesting to me. The next part is that when you look at a lot of these graphs, PCG can be put inside of PCG. So any value that you plug into the output, I could create custom outputs that would say the word trees. And I can then get another PCG graph and put that inside of it and access all of the trees that were output from one graph. So I can execute the graph, find all the trees, and if I wanted to, I could do bushes, and I could change the size of the bushes based on their distance to the trees, because I'm like, hey, you were living in shadow, so you shouldn't have grown as much. You know what I mean? Like, and customizing all of that kind of stuff. How are we going for time? Let me just check. I've done the same thing every time. 4:15. 4:15 right now? Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. And we finish off at 5, is that right? I think I have some time for that. Yeah, okay. I could probably do that. No, it's better if I do the other stuff. So yeah, like I said, so we can kind of go through, and I could custom spawn bushes. Spawning bushes to change on size is literally add a sampler, get the distance of the tree sampler to the other one, run an encroachment check. So remember the difference node that we used, which removes anything that's overlapping, because we just want to obliterate any bushes that are currently inside of trees, I assume. And then after we've done that, we can just get the distance node, find out how close you are to the nearest tree, and then we scale you up or scale you down accordingly, right? So like having that kind of logic and getting those things up is great. But what's very cool is when we look at these nodes, do I have one in here? I think you are. You are not. Give me one moment. I think density 2, yeah, you are. So here's a cool part. These nodes can be written in C++ or they can be written in Blueprint. Okay? So the reason that's really useful is it's very easy. I fully expect teams to start writing libraries of nodes that work for them and their projects and their systems, and then just carrying them forward between those projects. And I think that's a really exciting prospect, right? Because you're going to start getting little techniques. Here's my forest generator. Here's the next version of that. Here's the next version that scatters these kind of things, et cetera, et cetera. And you kind of end up with that snowballing effect between projects. But like, as I said, I just don't want people to think about PCG as forest generators. I really want to hit that quite hard, because if you think about it as forest generation, I think you're going to miss a lot of the better positions you could use it. I mean, even right down to if I was making a game set in an office or a school or something, I can easily run PCG now as a component that scatters clutter across all of the desks. And I can scatter clutter across all of the desks based on, maybe I put some actors in the world that says something like the quality of the classroom. The desks can all look for the quality of that specific classroom and then have, or they could look at the classroom type, you know, and say, hey, if this table ever gets put into an art room, all of the stuff that gets scattered on top is the art supplies. But if this table is ever put into one of the English teaching rooms or something, then it's going to be a bunch of dictionaries. I don't know. But my point is like we can kind of like customize, like we can flick between these things, and you can build tools that are appropriate to your projects. And I think that's really exciting too, because it's more than that as well. Like I can comfortably scatter, I can grab every table, for instance, and randomly place chairs around them to kind of build a vibe, et cetera, et cetera. Wait. Come on. Thank you. Just keeping you on your toes.
I was wondering, like, can you plug in other types of things apart from graphics, like sound and interaction areas?
Yeah.
Like,
so at the moment, there's a few outside of static mesh spawner. I think you can get standard Blueprint spawner and a few others. But again, you can kind of build those as well. So like the stuff that you wanted to create, you can kind of go through and build them as necessary. But I think this will just get more and more substantial in the future. Like you will get your decal supports and Niagara system supports and things like that. I can't remember which ones are there right now out of the box, unfortunately. But I know you can spawn generic blueprints, so you should be able to accordingly then spawn any of the other things from there. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to tap on here is, at the moment, it pushes out your results. It caches it, but you can also run it at runtime. So the runtime part's really exciting because you can do things like, I can run this forest, and when someone walks into a log cabin in the woods, you can actually just rerun it while they're in the cabin. And you see how quickly it's running normally, right? Like it's pretty quick. So you can rerun it, and then they come out, and the forest is different. And they're like, what's up? But you could change the entire biome as well, right? So I could rerun it in a grand scale, or I could rerun it on a minor scale to just be a little bit unsettling. Yeah, so as I said, that's the kind of stuff that I'm pretty excited for. And for anyone that caught the draw spline tool stuff that we had earlier today in the intro session, all it takes to get PCG to have an autofill biome kind of a setup is you create a blueprint, you give it a PCG component that has something that fills its own spline, which is 2 nodes. And then with the draw spline tool, you're then able to just kind of draw whatever you want, and it'll just create easy patch of flowers or easy crop of trees or whatever else, you know? And then you can kind of shift it around as required. So, yeah.
Hello. So as we all know, Bethesda has just released Starfield. And I was just thinking in terms of Unreal and its PCG systems for things like Starfield, No Man's Sky, procedural kind of worlds and like generation of that kind of content, how performant is this and how expensive is this solution in that kind of scale?
Yeah, sure. So from a procedural perspective, it's pretty good. Because ultimately, all that's doing is creating an actor at the moment that is instances. So there's the overhead of that existing is essentially the same as me having painted them in with the Foliage tool. Okay, so it's pretty good on that front. In the case of what you're discussing, though, which is, hey, as I approach a planet, I want to start generating trees and such around it. I know you can explicitly call PCG to say, hey, rerun. I can't recall if you can run it from the perspective of like, as I'm approaching the next quadrant, start to generate ahead of me or not. So I'd need to check that. But extending it to do that off the top of my head doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world either. So, yeah. But that said, their systems with what they've done for those kind of projects involves a lot more than just the scattering of the forests and things like that. So I'm not trying to make it sound like it's an easy task to have the full planet generation. I'm not so naive. But I did want to, yeah, getting the raw parts of that up and running, I think wouldn't be a super difficult hurdle. Cool. The next thing I want to show you is I want to open up Electric Dreams again and kind of give you an idea of what some of the systems are that are working within that. Gross leg. Video games. All right, shut this down and I'll switch over to here. Library, cat test. It's actually ended up being a really nice thumbnail. Just call that out. I'm pretty chuffed at how that looks. All right, so this is the Electric Dreams sample. This is able to be launched by clicking the Samples button and grabbing it from here. Okay, so this isn't like some fancy thing that we've hidden away from everyone. Also, for the record, the Hillside sample is pretty good, and a lot of people skipped over it because it's a ArcViz sample, but there's some really cool stuff in that, including like a dynamic weather system and the metahuman no, not the metahuman, the traffic simulation from the Matrix Awakens demo and the city sample is also in there, and it's 1/4 the size of the city sample, so maybe that appeals to you if you wanted to just check out the cars and didn't want to download a 200 gig sample. Cool, so we open this up within Electric Dreams. You've got a whole bunch of different layers, okay? A whole bunch of different levels, and each level has been set up as such. I'll show you the big thing again, and then we'll step back once it finishes loading. Sorry, folks, I opened the wrong level before, I guess, to properly demo this. Dun, 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 dun. All right, here we go. That'll teach me. I opened up the other level before, but this should be pretty quick. It's fine. Side note, Unreal didn't used to have the loading bars on this as it was async as of a couple of years ago. So every time this does happen, even though I'm annoyed that it's building something, I'm happy that it's building while I can still poke at things in the editor instead of being locked out. Great. So this is the demo that we originally had. One thing I want to flag is with how this is set up, we actually have an artist-driven area, and then we have a procedural generated area. I think it was inside of a data layer. World partition. All right, so no, it wasn't inside of a data layer. That's okay. How this works is you've got these areas. I'm going to hide the forest just so we can kind of see what's going on. So the custom area that was kind of made by the artists, you can see over here. So this was the kind of more meticulously done hand-placed elements. And then if I turn the forest generation on, then we eventually start to get through to these other areas that have all been handled by PCG. Now, a lot of the time, if you're like, well, how were these kind of things handled? How do you build stuff like that? If you go to open level within Electric Dreams and you go PCG, breakdown levels, you can open up any of these ones. I'm going to grab the spline example is pretty good, so I'll start with you. So how it works is before what I was scattering was meshes, right? However, what we're scattering this time around isn't actually meshes. See this here? This is actually an entire level. So in Unreal, we have level instances. If I hit Control E, we'll go into level instance mode. And this opens the level inside of my level and allows me to do whatever I need to in the context. But when I hit save, that gets saved as a level. You're all with me still? And what happens is inside of these actors, this can now all be hand placed. So the artists can kind of like really sculpt this and make this look however they want to. But if I look at the tags on each of these actors, where's a good example? Oh, I should have been seeing tags. Maybe these ones weren't tagged appropriately. Surely you were. There we go. They have a whole bunch of a lot of them have things like keep vertical. So remember before I mentioned we can get all actors with certain tags and things like that? Same thing here is basically what happens is inside of PCG, we can analyze a level. The level gets saved off as a data structure. PCG can then look at that, and we've put in a bunch of instructions to say if something says keep vertical, even if the level has it pointing here and you've made the level face this way, make the tree still point back upwards again. A lot of the foliage things have tags on them to say, hey, I'm allowed to be rotated at any point 360. So basically, even though this looks like it's a consistent thing, these trees can also all be randomized as to whether the trees exist or don't exist. Certain rocks can be flagged as I'm happy to get rid of this rock or I'm not happy to get rid of this rock. Do you know what I mean? So like you can set up a bunch of rule sets that are appropriate to your project. And then over here, it means that when we get something as simple as the same kind of spline tool that we made in the first session today, PCG just runs its algo over the top, and it makes this one level instance over and over and over again while randomizing certain elements of it. And I don't know about you, but to me that does not feel like it's tiling. You know, like that there's enough variance from doing it that way that you can end up with a pretty good result. And if we look at some of the other PCG breakouts, so if I was to look at the ditch is a good one. In this situation, it's the same kind of thing, except they built a bunch of different ditches. So we're able to kind of like randomize between these ones and see what we want. And in doing so, when we get this spline, and like I pull that to here, it's actually just kind of gonna give me some really vastly different results, but it can still be kind of shuffled around and made to look still very artist-driven. You know what I mean? Like that's, a lot of people think of this kind of set and they think to themselves, I guess we would need the ability to grow vines and we would need the bit, you know what I mean? Like they actually overestimate the scope of the problem, because ultimately the problem is actually, let's get some things that are pretty close to the types of stuff that we want and then flag variation within that. And courtesy of nature and some random rotations, we get some pretty good results as to what actually like holds up in these situations. So it's worth kind of going into these. And if we look at the PCG component that's on it, PCG demo ditch. There's more going on than the graphs that I made before, but honestly, it's actually not that much more than the graphs that I made before. You know, like for the scope of the problem that it's solving, and keeping in mind that this is now something that you could theoretically have. No, not even theoretically. Do I have internet here? Yeah, I have internet here. All right. So like an example is Dungeon Architects recently did a PCG implementation, which was they got their standard PCG, they got their standard level builder that they already had, and they ran PCG on the edges of the splines. So this was just using our data set that we had set up with Quixel assets. It's going to happen. I call the music. And instead of it generating the rooms like it normally would, it's just generating the shape of those areas with splines. And you can see that whenever they change the spline here, it's kind of carving out the forest again. It's cutting through it. And like to me, that holds up really well as a procedural environment. Like as something that has like procedural, as a dungeon, despite not actually being a dungeon. It'd be very easy to add blocking volumes around the edges of that procedurally and make sure the player couldn't escape the space. But they tied our system into their system because all they had to do was get spline data from their system and output the rule sets that they wanted that would be appropriate. Which I think is pretty exciting. And if I go back to the ditch here, the last thing that I will flag is, where is it? This runs through copy points with hierarchy. So a lot of what's doing the heavy lifting inside of these systems here is each of those levels gets added to a graph node here that is itself, we've set up our own custom script that whenever we right-click on them, you can go scripted action, convert level to PCG settings. And ideally in the future, this is going to be a thing that we have a nicer approach for. But this generates a PCG settings asset that we've created that says, here are all the meshes inside of that level with the key tags on all of them. That is like a quick lookup mode that we've set. So we have built a tiny layer on top of it, but it's also a tiny layer that we've exposed to the public, and you can see how we've done it and built it in this way, and hopefully appropriate to your own projects. Yeah. Like I said, I kind of wanted to go from what I had done, give you a good feel for how the system works, and then show you what the advanced versions of. And honestly, it's not that much more And it has been very well commented throughout, so you can get a pretty good idea of what's going on. How do we rotate certain actors that have certain tags, et cetera, et cetera. How are those things kind of sorted? So in this case, you can say, hey, we're looking at this. We're looking at the parent rotation value. We're checking this. If this is equal to 1, then rotate them. If not, don't rotate them. You know, like we're just running simple filters, splitting the points out, doing operations, and then combining them back in again to each other each time. Yeah, groovy. Questions? Yeah. There's Caitlin with the mic. Oh, Dean with the mic. Everyone. Okay.
Test.
Thank you. So yeah, I was just wondering, so if I was to say I wanted to merge a portion of this PCG into another project, is there a quick way to export something like this out, or like a portion of it out, and put it into my own project? Is that kind of just migrating, or is that?
It'd be migrating. You just need to be aware of the consequences of what migrating is in this case, which is this is a pretty big project. And it cooks down well, I guess, but there's a lot of there's a lot of 4K textures and million poly meshes getting thrown into your project. So as long as you're willing to live with the consequences of migrating this into it, then
it wouldn't be the whole thing. It would just be like a portion, like a small.
Yeah. So I
know,
think
and chunk it
the
out.
blueprints reference the PCG, and the PCG references the levels. So I think you would get all of the assets, but it may not include the raw level instances.
Gotcha.
That's the part that I'm not 100% sure on.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is there any way PCG could negatively impact your game? Something that we should maybe be aware of, or?
That's a great question. So I think the main thing that I will flag is, at the moment in PCG, there's no elegant system to grab this one tree that it's generated and shift it. So in those kind of situations, at the moment, you could create a dummy actor that is a tag that is a remove PCG actor with a radius value on it or something that allows you to not spawn any PCG within those areas, and you need to just be aware that you're going to art direct those kinds of things. I think in the future we're looking for a way to break out specific things and not spawn stuff at locations, but I don't know how far in the future that solution is. So I guess the biggest negative impact is really just, is largely in my head going to be from art direction, being this is a good way to do sweeping art direction, but if your forest needs to have a bunch of very carefully placed trees for very specific reasons, you're going to need to drop stuff in there to remove it, to then handle it yourself in custom ways at those locations. Do you know what I mean? So this is really good if you have like a 64-kilometer map or something, and you're like, I need my forest and everything else to feel like a real lived-in experience with a whole lot of stuff there. But if whenever you get areas that need customization, you're going to need a way to dial it back, and your artists need to be prepared for the consequences of. So in a weird way, it can do really high density generation quite well, right? But if you're saying, hey, don't generate PCG in these areas, your artists now need to basically have just as high density custom areas done so that it doesn't feel mismatched from the rest of your world. Do you get what I mean? Like, which is an awkward problem to have because you're like, all right, you need to match the machine. But yeah, and you can break it out at the moment. If you get one of these, if you get the PCG component on a standard scene, you can break it. I think it's all the way down the bottom. Clear PCG link. That will remove it and just keep the instant static meshes. And I think you can then export them. So there might be nice-ish ways to do it, but it still is, yeah, it is still potentially fiddly in certain situations. And it's that kind of stuff, I think, that is why it's also still in beta. But outside of that, if you're running it statically like this, it has the same overhead of the same of these meshes just being placed in the world as instances anyway. So like Functionally, it's the same as me painting in Foliage, really. I guess another issue that's a weird one. Sorry, it's actually a good question that no one's actually asked before. No one's asked me before. I guess. I guess functionally, the other thing is that it's very easy to add additional layers this way. So you also need to kind of check yourself before you technically wreck yourself, I think is the. But no, you need to actually it's very easy to accidentally add way too much going on there because it's very easy to I'll add more layers, I'll add more layers, I'll add more layers. And Nanite handles that really well. But if you're targeting certain non-Nanite platforms and things like that, you're going to need to, again, deal with that. I think PCG currently doesn't have branching per platform, but I believe that's on the roadmap as well for hey, on mobile, don't run this chain of meshes to spawn, that kind of stuff. But I'm not sure if that's a 5.4 thing or not. You'd think I'd know. I've been talking to that team a lot lately, but I don't, sorry. Yeah. Check right.
Number seeds so that it's deterministic. Is the system deterministic? And if it is, how do you make it less deterministic?
Good question. So you can pull the seed from the. You can pull the seed from here. So there's one global seed, and then within that global seed, you can also, whenever you have a sample, you can also override those seeds. One of these things is the seed. You can also override those seeds as well. So I can either override them on the sampler, or you can override them. Actually, spline is the one that won't do it. Let me find a non-spline sample. He says zooming in on another spline sample. Actually, this is all going to be very spline-based. I don't think we do a landscape sample in here. The ditch would. No, not the ditch. The large assembly. This one. Oh, no, not that one either. You can micro. I just can't find the thing to do it. Sorry. Maybe it's the one that has the larger ground that gets swapped out would probably do it. Yeah, this one. Yeah, sweet. Because this ground, which is the ground demo, when it gets swapped out, it won't have spline samples. He said seeing the most spline samples we've seen so far. I thought we were doing a ground sample as well. All right, we're probably not. All right, that's fine. Yeah, seed. So for anything that does have kind of chaos there, you could read that from a separate variable on a per asset basis. Yeah. Ah, the forest. Of course the bloody forest would. Sorry, I forgot that there was an entire forest actor in here that would do it. Yeah.
The other sort of not really related question, just more on the whole system.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting the impression that so it's leveraging Nanite for culling stuff because it's not doing any kind of culling or visibility checks in real time and whatnot. Okay, cool. Yeah. So if you're not using Nanite, you have to be really, really careful.
Yeah, I mean, otherwise you're culling like you would have in the olden days, I think. Ye old culling systems. But yeah, Nanite's very good at working out what not to draw. So because of that, we can kind of go nuts and be like, hey kids, here's a forest. And it's pretty good at removing the aspects in between. Yeah. But that said, PC, PlayStation, Xbox are all pretty friendly for Nanite at this point. Your phone, on the other hand, you're going to need to be a little bit more careful on, unfortunately. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, if anyone wants to get, yeah. You know what? Every time I call out phones at the same time, I'm like, yeah, they're just not there yet. And then someone's like, phones are often like one generation of console behind,
18 months.
which is terrifying. So, at the same time, the other thing that I'll point out is like for the larger projects, you start a game today, it's probably shipping in 2025 if you're lucky, which means, yeah, even on the PC front where I talk about hardware, like a 30 series graphics card or even a 20 series graphics card. 20 series graphics card is now what, 18 I think they were, right? So a 20 series graphics card is now 5 years old, 6 years old. Start a game now and that thing, which is it's pretty good specs for a DX12, is now going to be shipping when it's 8 years old, which is over a console generation, I guess. I'm having an existential crisis in front of you all. Anyway, video games. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, thank you.
Say if you were to have a massive long distance environment and you wanted to be able to see, for example, a field that starts from your feet and goes all the way to the mountains.
Yep.
And yet it still looks realistic.
Yep.
How would you be able to do that and keep your performance?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, what you're seeing in front of us is, there we go. Give me the good stuff. All right, so this world is, let me check what you are. We're going to get there. One day. Yeah, good. All right, so it's 4 kilometers. At the moment, it's 4 by 4 kilometers. Now, if you wanted it to be performant, you would leverage. If you wanted it to be performant, you would leverage world partition. So world partition is a system that's built into UE. Sorry, I'm just thinking of what projects I've got that have world partition that are on my laptop with like a good setup to demonstrate it. I think if the city sample's on here, I can open that, but I think the city sample is not on here. Cat test doesn't have it before you say it. Could feel it. I knew it was coming. No, so none of the projects on my laptop have it, unfortunately. All right, so we have a system called world partition. World partition, you generate whatever you need to, and you build whatever you need to. World partition then goes and creates proxy LODs. So whenever you're not within X kilometers, it falls back on a simplified mesh that you've pre-generated. Pre-generated meshes don't need to necessarily be an actual mesh that you've generated. They can also be instances of meshes. So it says, hey, grab this mesh and sample it a bunch of times at its lowest LOD at a distance. Then as we approach it, fade between the proxy version and the real version that you've got. If you wanted to handle a really large world with really dense stuff, you'd probably be leaning on this system combined with HLODs for your really far off stuff. And as you approached it, it would fall back into the PCG stuff that you've generated. Oh, yeah. Just assume yes for can you use nanite for that, should you use nanite for that on all cases. At this point, anytime you can use nanite, you should. Basically is the rule of thumb. It's a very easy rule. The only things that are unsupported with nanite right now are transparencies and skeletal meshes. 5.3 added spline mesh support in a very early experimental phase, but I think that'll get into a good spot. Shouldn't have said that on camera. But I think that'll get into a good spot, and I really hope it does. Yeah, so there's really only a couple of outliers at this point, and yeah, it's just really, really grossly quick at rendering, so wherever possible, it's good.
Yeah, is the HLODs automatically generated in the world partition system?
Automatically in the sense that you need to click build HLODs. this button here. This map doesn't have them set up. If you ever use the default new level open world one, that does have an HLOD streaming setup. A weird way that's actually reasonably good at learning how HLODs work is actually UEFN, because a lot of those worlds have world partitions set up to automatically build huge Fortnite maps, and you can open them up and then just click, yeah, you'll see how that stuff works. But world partition automatically generates HLODs for the partition sections, and then assigns them and micromanages them behind the scenes without you having to like remember they exist, except for the times that you click build. The other really good part of world partition handling HLODs is it does them as deltas. So if you have a huge world and you mess with just this tiny quadrant over here, and it's being broken into a whole bunch of HLODs, it'll only, when you click build HLODs, it won't rebuild the whole world. It'll just rebuild this busted section over here, which is really, really handy. That said, my general advice for HLODs is Unreal's got a lot of commandlet support. I'm not sure if any teams here have set up any of that kind of stuff for like a Jenkins setup or something, but HLODs are a really easy thing to hook in so that every evening your build server will grab the latest version of the map, build HLODs, and prep that for artists the next day, just so that it's all in a nice, happy space for people. Like ideally, you don't want that to be anyone's computer dealing with it, because it takes a couple of minutes to build, and time better spent working. You know, like a big part of like UE5 was us being like, hey, most of our systems are dynamic now, like the global illumination and stuff. So we're trying to remove baking and things like that, and PCG is super quick, for instance. But the big outlier to that is still HLODs require a coffee break. So, yeah. All right, I think we're good. Oh, sorry.
Other questions? I didn't see any hands anymore. Caitlin, do we have something from online?
Nothing online?
Nothing online.
Okay, that's fine. All right, well look, in that case, thank you all very much for your time. It's been really great having everyone here. I just want to reiterate one last point that Caitlin kindly brought up before, which is if you were at the mixer, it'd be great to make sure that your name was noted either with Caitlin or that you did RSVP to that originally, just because we'd really love to get a meetup group established within the region where there's a few benefits to that. Obviously, it builds a local community. It gives me a little bit more weight to say, hey, look, there's a lot of UE devs out in Perth, and I can then sneakily work that into various schedules, like if I'm coming back from Malaysia or Singapore or something, you're on the way. And it gives us a good avenue to have more content kind of coming out this way and supporting devs more. Because at the moment I mean, COVID ruined my cadence, but before that I was probably coming out once, maybe twice a year, and I would like to maintain something like that. But it's a lot easier to do that when there are devs on the ground who are already also kind of doing that stuff that we can kind of like liaise with and work with, and it's easy for me to know that a lot of people are going to rock up to a session that we're running on something cool. So yeah, if you want to reach out on that front, it'd be great. And hopefully we can get something created within the next couple of weeks for people to start getting on board with. Otherwise, thank you all very much for your time. Thanks for having me. I hope this has been good. And looking forward to seeing some of your games on Saturday at the exhibition, right? Wee-wee.
Thank you for making it all the way out to Perth, and for Epic for sending Chris. It was great. That was amazing. Like Chris just said, if everyone's cool with it, maybe reach out. If you're not, otherwise I'll assume you are. I'll grab your email addresses from the talks tickets and add you to that. And then I've got everyone. If you randomly rocked up, that's fine, because numbers are great and we love them. And just let me know and I'll add your email.
Wonderful.
Cool. That's a wrap on our third day of the talk series. There's one more day left. It's a jam-packed day. Tomorrow, I think the majority of the speakers tomorrow are actually flying in, like now and tomorrow morning. So we've got lots of special guests. It's lovely. And tonight is the Perth Game Dev meetup at Ruin Bar in Northbridge. So might see you there as well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you coming?
I guess so.
Party! All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Cool.
Bye.
In 2291, in an attempt to control violence among deep space miners, the new Earth government legalized no-holds-barred fighting. The Andrew Mining Corporation, working with the NEG, established a series of leagues and bloody public exhibitions.